2020 started full of promise. I vowed I'd rid myself of old habits and start living a more balanced and adventurous life. The first days of COVID were shocking, what seemed like madness, and I was in disbelief. It was incredible to me how quickly the world was being infected. While people in Canada uprooting their entire routine, setting up home offices, adjusting to new stresses, policies, and procedures at work, home, and socially. I was brought up not to watch much of the news. I was told it was too negative and highly inaccurate. And in COVID, quickly I learned to adopt this habit again, as I saw how many around me were so burdened by the onslaught of news, and yet would continue to watch, complain, and let it affect their day. I witnessed colleagues lose their job, parents struggle with childcare, their children's schooling, while trying to juggle and maintain their own career. World events, Black Lives Matter, and daily Trump antics. Clients worrying about money and budgets, co-workers struggling with double workloads, asked to be tolerant of other co-workers that stayed at home for many reasons. I was frustrated to see my favorite small businesses close, one after another. We are so fortunate to live in a rich country with so many luxuries and freedoms compared to others in the world. We always have been. But my biggest wake-up call that I saw in myself was not to judge, truly not have any opinion about anyone or anybody's situation, their reaction or non-action. For the first time, I was looking at everyone, and no matter what they did or said, I started saying to myself, you have no idea what this person is going through. Do not react, do not comment, be tolerant, be caring, show love. And then I called myself out. Hey, why were you not like this before? It took a pandemic for me to realize everyone is always going through something. I most likely would not trade in my troubles for anyone else's. I was recovering from surgery the week the pandemic hit, and I had previously prayed that I could recover without a lot of doting and attention. My prayers were answered. I set my sights on walking and biking in new places and hopefully canoeing. Finding regular visits with my mom. Her heart was weakening, but that did not stop her. I had to make an appointment to catch her between her activities. 4 weeks into COVID, I co-founded a Friday night quarantini with my close friends that I've known for decades. But in those 3 hours, every Friday night for 25 weeks, we toasted each other, had theme nights, asked fun questions, laughed until we cried, and learned more about each other than ever before, truly deepening our friendships. I lost a longtime close friend in October, brain aneurysm, sitting in her home office, suddenly gone. Last Friday, my daughter's future mother-in-law, gone after a 2-year battle with breast cancer. It was an honor to know that woman. And Mom's heart weakened, as they said it would, and she passed in December. And I wish everyone to live 88 full years right to the last minute, pass peacefully with no pain, as Mom did. I was grieving and panicked, thinking I was going to be all alone on Christmas, and my prayers were answered again. Nexus friends and extended family saw me through. We have lived and witnessed numerous heavy moments this year. And I'd like to thank Brad for the weekly teachings he has guided us through this year with strength and humor. And thank you to the Nexus team for their hard work to adapt to these times. At times, I have felt guilty for all the adventures, fun, and love I have experienced this year when others have not. I'd like to end with a Celtic prayer about being protected. Take me under your protection, O beloved angel of God. just as the Lord of grace so ordained. Accompany me in all times and protect me from worry and danger. I ask for the light of light, the vision of Trinity, and the grace of patience in face of injustice. Life is but a passing shadow. Our stay here is but for a time, but we will have good weather after the final raindrop. O God, all-powerful, you are my strength. O Lord of all the world, my life is yours. Whatever be your will, may it be done. O Lord, give me your grace and your love, and I will be safe forevermore. Amen.
Hey.
Hey.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Dave. Great to see you. And thank you, Kathy, for that COVID reflection. It has certainly been a challenging year for many of us. And it's good for the community, I think, to hear about all the different challenges out there. So thank you for sharing that, Kathy. And thank you for that prayer at the end in particular. Really enjoyed that. So thank you, Kathy. Dave, you're doing well?
Yeah, doing okay. Going around the house in my sweatpants,
Yeah,
What else?
exactly.
You're doing school still?
And now I've got at least 3 more weeks of it. It's been extended.
Yes.
So what can you do?
You're learning a lot?
Oh, yes. About patience.
Yes.
But
yes.
while I have everyone here, good morning, Nexus. Want to ask you quickly, if you could, just for a little project we have coming up. If you speak a language other than English, would you let us know in the comments in the YouTube section there? Would appreciate that. I've got a little something sort of cooking up. So if that's you, we would love to know if you speak another language besides English. So we'll park that there. Dave, tell us what you're going to do music-wise this morning.
Music-wise, it was a hard one because you cover some really cool territory today. But I thought, things like blame, accusation, put the weight right on someone else.
Yeah,
if that's a hint. I thought I'd do try that old band tune, The Weight, and a bit of a blues tune, Before You Accuse Me. So, and then I guess after that we'll head into your sermon.
Yep, in a sermon, and then we've got an announcement at the end as well about some boomerangs coming up. So should be, I hope, a great morning. So cool. Dave, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, here we go. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. I'm spending my money on other women. You're taking money from someone else. I called your mama about 3 or 4 nights ago. I called your mama about 3 or 4 nights ago. Well, your mama said, son, don't call my daughter no more. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. I'm spending my money on other women. You're taking money from someone else. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. Say I'm spending my money on other women. You're taking money from someone else. Nazareth was feeling about a half past dead. I just need some place where I can lay my head. Hey, mister, can you tell me where a man might find a bed? He just grinned and shook my hand, and no was all he said. Take a load off Annie, take a load for free. Take a load off Annie, and put the load right on me. I picked up my bag, went looking for a place to hide. I saw Carmen and the devil walking side by side. I said, hey there, Carmen, come on, let's go downtown. She said, I gotta go, but my friend can stick around. Take a load off Annie, take a load for free. Take a load off Annie, and put the load right on me. I go down, Miss Moses, there ain't nothing you can say. It's just old Luke, Luke's waiting on the judgment day. Well, Luke, my friend, what about young Anna Lee? He said, do me a favor, son, won't you stay and keep Anna Lee company? Take a load off Annie, take a load for free. Take a load off Annie, and right on me. Well, Crazy Chester followed me, he caught me in the fog. He said, I'll fix your rack if you take Jack, my dog. I said, wait a minute, Chester, now I'm a peaceful man. He said, oh, that's okay, boy, feed 'em when you can. Take a load off Annie, take a load for free. Take a load off Annie, and put the load right on me. Take a load off Annie, I put the load right on me.
I want to tell you the story this morning of two 10-year-old girls, and our story begins in the dreamy little town of Stoke-on-Trent in England, and it's June 2001, and a little girl, almost 10 years old, is standing on her front lawn with a red balloon in her hand. And on this balloon, she has written her name and address with a brief message that simply says, "Please return to Laura Buxton." And she stands there waiting, and just as a gust of wind passes by, she lets go of her balloon and watches it soar above her house and slowly drift away.
To where and to who, she has no idea, but with the wild hopes of a dreaming child, she imagines it perhaps landing in Buckingham Palace and receiving a letter from the Queen, or she imagines it maybe landing in the hands of J.K. Rowling, her favorite childhood author. She imagines herself getting a letter from the author of Harry Potter herself, and caught in her daydream, she skips around her yard and giggles before other childhood distractions capture her attention. And unbeknownst to her, that balloon, it would end up in someone's hands, but the hands of the person who would receive it would be a whole lot more magical than even little Laura Buxton could imagine. You see, that red balloon would take a wild trip due south, up it went, past Stratford and Oxford, past Walsall and Wolverhampton, Birmingham and Kidderminster, Worcester and Gloucester. On and on the balloon travels. Over 140 miles it flies, soaring over the heads of millions of different people with different stories. And of course, the balloon, it could have drifted out over sea or perhaps got caught up in a tree. It could have ended up as so many other balloons, right? Caught in power lines or in some abandoned field. But no, this balloon, it seems, has a purpose. And after 140 long miles, the balloon slowly descends into a little village called Milton Lilbourne. And it comes to rest in a bush between two houses and eventually into the hands of another 10-year-old girl. And this other 10-year-old girl studies this strange red balloon, and she reads aloud on it, "Please return to Laura Buxton." And this confuses the new 10-year-old girl because this balloon had landed in her yard. It had come into her hands, and she looked again at the message, Laura Buxton. And this was very peculiar to her because her name was also Laura Buxton. And so 10-year-old Laura Buxton releases a balloon, hoping it might land in the hands of someone special. That balloon travels over 140 miles against the prevailing wind and lands in the hand of another little girl, same age, same name, Laura Buxton. And naturally, Laura Buxton, too, writes to Laura Buxton #1 with this strange, incredible story, revealing the fate of the balloon. And within weeks, the two families have actually arranged for the two little girls to meet one another. And this is where the story gets even stranger. Arriving at the cafe that they planned to meet in, these two girls, they see each other for the first time, and they realize that not only do they have the same name, but they both look the same as well. Same height. Skinny and tall, same color hair, brown. But even more quizzical, the two girls show up wearing the exact same outfit. Pink jumpers and jeans. And as they started to talk, things just keep getting more and more odd. Each of them had a 3-year-old black Labrador. Each of them had a pet gray rabbit, and both of them owned guinea pigs. But not only that, each of them had decided to bring their guinea pig to show the other girl. And because the story couldn't get any stranger, their guinea pigs also happened to be identical. Brown with a sort of beige, orangey patch on their bum. The girls were absolutely awestruck. Everything about the two girls seemed completely the same. That magical balloon ride was the start of an incredible decades-long friendship. Over 20 years ago, that balloon brought them together, and to this day, they are still the best of friends. Neither Laura Buxton can explain exactly how something like this would happen, except for them to chalk it up to fate. Was it luck over incredible odds? Perhaps, both Lauras say, but their friendship today was forged because they simply can't believe that this flight of this red balloon was just a lucky wind. For them, fate, call it whatever you will, it had brought them together. Now hold on to that story for a moment because I want to return to it because I hope it will come to sort of illustrate something we see powerfully at work in the book of Acts. You see, it's the power of storytelling. And you'll remember from last week in the book of Acts, it opens with Jesus leaving his followers. They're to wait for the Spirit to come at Pentecost, because Pentecost is this big game changer for the Christian path, for the trajectory of the Christian path. And it also means that everything we read before Pentecost in the book of Acts is a bit suspect, and we're about to see why. You see, the disciples, they're waiting in Jerusalem, but they don't seem to do well at the waiting game. And so Peter decides to move into the realm of storyteller. And he's a storyteller with an agenda. And pay attention to how Peter crafts his story. Here's how it unfolds in Acts chapter 1. In those days, Peter stood up among the believers, a group numbering about 120, and said, "Brothers and sisters, the scriptures had to be fulfilled in which the Holy Spirit spoke long ago through David concerning Judas, who served as guide for those who arrested Jesus. He was one of our number and shared in our ministry. And with the payment he received for his wickedness, Judas bought a field. There he fell headlong, his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. Everyone in Jerusalem heard about this, so they called that field in their language Akeldama, that is, field of blood. For, said Peter, it is written in the book of Songs, may his place be deserted, let there be no one to dwell in it, and may another take his place of leadership." Now, it starts to become clear as we read these words that Peter has an agenda, and we'll get to what his agenda was shortly. But I want you to notice something key here. Notice how Peter crafts his story. The story he tells, of course, is that Judas bought a field with the money he received for betraying Jesus, and he died by suicide there. But wait, what? If you have your Bibles, flip over to Matthew 25. This is incredible to me. How does Matthew tell the story of Judas? And he, Judas, threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed. And he went away and hanged himself. The chief priest took the pieces of silver and said, "It is not lawful to put them into the temple treasury, since it is the price of blood." And they conferred together, and with the money bought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Whoa. So notice what's happening here. According to Matthew, Judas didn't buy the field. But notice how Peter is spinning the story here. And this is what storytellers do. A little fact like that is but a technicality. So maybe Judas didn't buy the field per se, but his treacherous blood money did. And so Peter is crafting his story in a particular way. But why? Well, it seems to me that Peter has two agendas here. The first is this. He wants Judas to play the role of scapegoat. He wants to absolve himself and the rest of the disciples from the guilt they carry over what happened to Jesus, his arrest, his torture, his death. He wants something to happen because of it. See, this is the thing. He wants Judas to play the role of scapegoat, but second, he also wants a replacement for Judas. And so he appeals to this prophecy in the Psalms to support his agenda. And this is how the rest of the story plays out. Therefore, it is necessary to choose one of the men who have been with us the whole time the Lord Jesus was living among us, beginning from John's baptism to the time when Jesus was taken up from us. For one of these must become a witness with us of his resurrection. So they nominated two men, Joseph called Barsabbas, also known as Justus, and Matthias. Then they prayed, "Lord, you know everyone's heart. Show us which of these two you have chosen to take over this apostolic ministry, which Judas left to go where he belongs." Then they cast lots, and the lot fell to Matthias, so he was added to the 11 apostles. I mean, this is a masterclass on the power of storytelling. In one story, Peter has freed himself and the other disciples from any kind of collective guilt they might have had. Judas is now their scapegoat. He's now the one who carries the burden of their collective guilt and shame, which is convenient because he's dead. Never mind that all of them fled and deserted Jesus when he was arrested. No, Judas will carry that alone, and because he's dead, he can't answer back. But more than that, with one story, Peter is free to move forward with his real agenda, which is replacing Judas. And there's a reason he wants to replace Judas. And so he tells the story not only to absolve himself from any guilt, but to move forward with his plans for replacement. And why is that significant? Well, what is of great interest to me in this story is the conspicuous absence, you could say, of God in all of this, in this story. You see, Jesus is gone, he has ascended, but the Spirit has not yet come. And so we're sort of post-resurrection, pre-Pentecost. And even though these disciples, they pray for God's direction over who to choose between the two men, it would seem like no response comes as they resort to casting lots. And so this pre-Pentecost event is telling God is absent from the story here. And it's telling the disciples are flirting with danger here, and their dangers are again our own. And you see, the problem with this group of Jesus followers is they're only beginning to come to understand and come to terms with what Jesus' resurrection really means. They can't comprehend what God is about to do and unleash at Pentecost. And so Peter is crafting his story, but that story is about to be interrupted. You see, before we get to Pentecost, it's worth reflecting on the power of storytelling and what that means for us. So let's consider Peter's agenda and his scapegoating of Judas. First, on Peter's agenda, you'll remember from last week, right, that Jennings told us that the book of Acts is like a big assault on nationalism in all of its forms. And we see this again with this story because you see, Peter's plan here seems to be sort of, let's circle the wagons and shore up our ranks by replacing Judas. And so Matthias is chosen to replace Judas as one of the 12. And this is important. Why is the disciples having 12 important to Peter? You see, Peter is still under the illusion of Jewish exceptionalism, you could say. Peter still believes that the kingdom of God is about restoring greatness to Israel. And if that's the case, then the 12 tribes of Israel must be complete. And of course, the disciples, they see themselves as carrying the mantle of Israel's 12 tribes. And so 11, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to do. They need 12 and 12 alone. And so Peter's aim is to restore the 12 apostles so that the new kingdom he is imagining will be complete. But here's what's interesting to me. Matthias's time on stage is oh so brief. We hear nothing of him again after this story. And so he's mentioned here and then he's lost to history. And why? Because Peter's storytelling is about to be interrupted. How so? You know, I have long wondered why it is that the Apostle Paul seems to come and take center stage within the Christian faith. And it's always struck me as incredibly odd that Jesus spends all this time in the Gospels with these 12, and then all of a sudden they take a back seat, it would seem, to this new guy, Paul, when he arrives in the New Testament, a few chapters from now in Acts. And this has been a puzzle for me, to be honest, until studying this passage. You see, while Peter and the disciples, they're trying to consolidate their power here, they're circling the wagons, what God's about to do in just a few chapters is interrupt their story by turning the 12 into 13. What Peter and the disciples want is 12. 12 is the number of Israel. 12 of us will do. And God interrupts with a 13th apostle. And I think this is how we see God act throughout history, always whispering to us, is there room for just one more? This is how God's plan for redemptive revolution in the world works. You see, it isn't a political revolution. It's not an election with the winner take all. No, by His Spirit, God is always asking us, does our love have enough room for just one more? He's always asking us by His Spirit if our circle of community and affection has room for just one more. And we see this all throughout the book of Acts. Right when you think the Jesus path circle is complete, it keeps asking, there must be room for just one more. It's like, great, you guys now have the 12 apostles again. This is awesome. Wow. But here's one more. And by the way, this one more happens to be the person who is trying to kill you. And this happens time and time again throughout the book of Acts. Right when we think, wow, the church is complete, it's always one more. Hey, what about this Ethiopian eunuch? Is there room for him? What about this Gentile who also happens to be part of Caesar's army? Is there room for him within the Christian path? The question of Acts always seems to be, how much can you expand? Is there room for one more, even that person? The Jesus path expands by always coaching us. Is there room for one more? And I like to think of God as the one who haunts us by always encouraging us to add just one. And like Peter, the temptation for all of us is to ever be thinking that our circle of embrace and love and affection is complete. But the moment we get there, God will interrupt with the one more question. You know, back in college days, I had a group of friends. We were thick as thieves. I absolutely loved these guys. We would spend so much time together, traveling together. We'd go out after class, go out to Kelsey's, go out and always spending a lot of time together. In fact, these 5 friends, there were 6 of us in total. They became my closest friends. I felt like I could tell them anything, be vulnerable with them. We were just incredibly close. In fact, we were so close, we started calling ourselves the Group of 6, and we ended up with a little sort of nickname for ourselves. We called ourselves the Spoons, and we even had t-shirts made up called the Spoons. It was a little bit weird, but the reason was our one friend, of course, was the one with the car. Only one of 6 of us had a car, and this car was tiny. It was like this little Mazda 323 hatchback. And whenever the 6 of us wanted to get around, it was so tight in that car that the 4 of us, whoever was in the back, we couldn't sit. We had to spoon. We had to sort of on our side to make room for all of us to fit. And we had wild, wonderful times. Just loved this group of guys. But I remember, I'll never forget the one evening we're sitting out at Kelsey's, we're sitting there having fun together, and one guy says, "Hey, how do you feel about adding one more?" He said, "I got a friend. I'd like to invite him into this group." And I remember in that moment, I was livid. I was just like, this group represents safety for me. This is my place to be vulnerable, and adding one more is only going to jeopardize that. And I was like, what are you talking about? Group of 7, that's already taken. We're the group of 6. We already got the t-shirts here. We can't add another person. I remember sitting there sort of silently resenting the suggestion that we would add one more, because this group was so special to me. I felt so safe there. I could totally be myself, and suddenly the prospect of adding one, it was a threat to me. And you see, this is where the power of storytelling, the power of stories we tell ourselves comes into view, because I think oftentimes we like to hide behind the story that we need borders and walls around our group of friends or communities, because that is the only way we'll feel safe to be vulnerable. And I want us to remember, from a micro to macro perspective, that's not a whole lot different than a nation saying they need a border wall to feel safe. Borders and walls are erected to keep us safe, be that within a nation or a group of friends. But the God we're about to meet in the book of Acts doesn't seem concerned by safety. After all, the 13th apostle that is added to the 12, the one that's introduced into the mix is Paul, the one who was trying to kill the other apostles, not exactly safe. And this is always the struggle for us as a people. Certain groups come to represent safety for us, and opening our borders, opening our walls, our boundaries represents a threat to us, but we have to challenge and push back on the stories we tell ourselves. And this is the radical nature and grace of God we see revealed in the book of Acts. The God we meet in Acts is the one who's constantly asking, is there room for one more? In your group of friends, in your community, in your family, is there room for one more? Is there room? And the temptation, I think, is always for us to say no to that invitation, because the story we have crafted for ourselves in our heads is that we are safer and we can be more vulnerable and authentic with borders and boundaries and walls around our families, our communities, our group of friends. But the God of Acts is always whispering, maybe there's room for one more. You know, I'm reluctant to give this person praise because he mocks me so often, but I have to say, especially because I've seen it a lot recently, you know who's really good at this adding one more? Bronson. Bronson, but this is about the only time you'll probably get praise from me in a sermon, but Bronson, I've noticed over the years, is actually remarkably good at this. And I was reminded of this just a few weeks ago. Bronson invited me to play a game online with a bunch of guys from Nexus. And I was like, oh, great, I know all of those guys. This is going to be a fun time. And so I get into the game and I'm like, I know these people. It's been so long since I've seen them. This is wonderful. I'm having a good time. And in the middle of the game, Bronson says, hey, do you mind if I add my friend Wayne to the group, to the game? And I remember thinking in my head, of course, Wayne? Who's Wayne? What? No. We've got this is our group here. This is good. This is safe. I like this. And I was reminded in that situation, by the way, Wayne comes in, fantastic guy, but I was reminded of that situation that my sort of instinct is always to say no to extending the borders and boundaries. I tend to value safety, community. And this is something I really have to check myself on is when I feel threatened, when I feel like, adding one is going to threaten how I feel or how vulnerable or how myself I can be, to remember the God of Acts is always the one whispering to us, maybe there's room for one more. You see, God interrupts the story the disciples are telling themselves. They want 12 and only 12. And God says, yes, but the 12 will become 13. And this new apostle's primary mission in life will be to stretch the boundaries and walls of the early Christians. And that God is still asking the same of us. Is there room for one more? Is there room to extend the borders, the boundaries, just a little, just one at a time? Be it with our family, our community, our circle of friends. The second thing that we see in the way Peter crafts his story is that he goes quickly into the blame game. And this is a game that's as old as Adam and Eve, but Peter uses it very effectively here. You see, the disciples are clearly harboring still this guilt and shame about their role in Jesus' death. And with one story, Peter is able to cast Judas as the sole villain, and with that, he downloads all of their collective guilt onto Judas. And notice that Peter does it by just skewing the story just slightly, just editing it just a little in his favor. He's not even really lying per se. He's just telling the story in a way that makes Judas look worse than he was. And Jennings reminds us here that what we are seeing with these disciples is still a group of people that are pre-Pentecost, a group of disciples that has yet to come to fully comprehend and understand what the totality of Jesus' resurrection means. And I love what Willie Jennings says about Judas. He says this: the last word on Judas will not come from Peter, it will come from Jesus. Divine opinion is separate from Peter's opinion. Peter narrates Judas' life for a purpose. Judas is the setup for what he really wants to see happen: replacement. And this is the awesome power of storytellers. They can invoke lives and play with them, juggling them like balls in the air, and the dead cannot answer back. They have no control over how their lives are used or how they are remembered, but last words no longer belong to us. They have been seized by a savior. Jesus' power now reaches into the grave, into Judas's grave. Oh, wow, that is powerful stuff, right? I mean, I love it. Peter takes the liberty of authoring sort of the final words, you could say, on Judas. And in doing so, he absolves himself of responsibility. But I love how Jennings says it. Last words no longer belong to us. And Peter's story is not God's story here. And last words no longer belong to those of us who tell stories. Peter has overstepped his bounds here in the role of storytelling. But what is of real interest to me is that God is conspicuously absent from this scene. And with that, how quickly the disciples resort to the blame game. And I think, of course, this raises a question for all of us. Who or what are we blaming? How are we shaping our stories within us that allow us to lay blame on something rather than taking responsibility ourselves? And I mean, considering the last point, let me confess a few of my own here. I mean, we all have stories we play into. One of my biggest ones is introversion, right? Especially when it comes to that adding one more element. And it's easy to hide behind these personality traits we have. Well, oh, no. I don't have room for more people because I'm introverted, right? Or the Enneagram is such a powerful tool. And yet the problem with the Enneagram, those of us, if we're not mature enough to handle it, is that our Enneagram type can become a personality thing that we hide behind. And I'm an Enneagram 6, so we like safety and security. We're loyal and we find trust a hard thing. And so it can be easy to hide behind, oh, no, the reason I don't want to be exclusive. That's not why I'm being exclusive. I just don't want to add people because I have trust issues. I need to be safe and secure. And it becomes easy to hide behind these stories when the God of Acts is calling us to something more. And it's not just that, it happens throughout all of our lives. I mean, it's no secret, of course, that I have a snack problem, right? It's a bit of an issue for me. I love my snacks. And, when you dig into my story, I like to tell people, listen, this isn't really my fault. My dad owned vending machines growing up, and my basement was essentially a candy playland. There was hundreds and thousands of chocolate bars and chips everywhere in our basement. Sure, he tried to lock them up, but we knew how to steal them. And so for my whole childhood, snacks and junk food were there all the time. It's not my fault I got a snack problem. It's because of the way I was brought up and raised. And we all have these little things we play around with in our head. This isn't really on me. Something else is to blame. And the reality is we need to unpack a lot of this stuff. There's some great work to be done in figuring out, why we are the way we are. But the truth is we can so often resort to the blame game, tell these stories in our head that this isn't really my responsibility. This isn't really my fault. I don't need to own this guilt or shame. This is on someone else. And the God of Acts wants to free us from that. Wants to liberate us from having to cast the blame somewhere else. And so there's a real important question for us. Who or what are we blaming in life? In our own personal stories that we craft in our heads? And is that keeping us from owning our responsibilities in life? What Peter does here is he's created and bought into a story that circles him in comfort and power and allows him to blame someone else for something he was complicit in. And Peter does this not even by overt lies, but by simply crafting a story that allows for it. And what we learn from Peter here is that power belongs to the storytellers, to those who tell stories best, to those whose stories are most convincing. It's true in the world, it's true in our own heads, but the lesson in storytelling is this: what stories are we telling ourselves that keep us playing the blame game and keep us from extending our boundaries? What stories, what narratives are we living into that keep us blaming while also keeping us from opening our walls and borders? And do we need to push back on those stories, challenge them, ask if those stories we're living by, if they're keeping us, are they keeping us from loving beyond our borders and keeping us from owning our responsibilities in life? Which brings us back, of course, to the story of the girl with the red balloon. And you see, no matter how you cut it, the story is pretty incredible and wild, but the reality is the way you tell a story is important. Peter knew this and he crafted his story to his own purposes, right? And the girl with the red balloon is the kind of story that can only make any of us seriously wonder about fate and destiny. That a balloon would go from one 10-year-old girl named Laura Buxton to another 10-year-old girl named Laura Buxton is absolutely incredible, but that the two would have so much in common is just phenomenal. And yet, the devil's in the details. You see, if you think back or look back, scroll back to the way I started telling you the story, what I started with is by telling you that Laura Buxton was almost 10 years old. And then I referred to the girls as 10-year-old girls for the rest of the story. It's a small detail, but one Laura is actually 9 and the other is 10. Small, but maybe the story is suddenly a little less compelling. And in talking about how similar the two girls were, what I did is I played up all of the features that match between the two. They both had a dog, a rabbit, and a guinea pig. But what I failed to point out was the obvious differences. Little things like the fact that they had different favorite colors, different favorite classes in school, a different number of siblings, because those little details, they don't help create a story about fate or destiny, and so I left them out. And finally, the story was told as the balloon leaving Laura's hands and falling into the hands of another Laura, but what I omitted from the story was that the balloon was actually found by Laura 2's neighbor. The neighbor found the balloon, and when he found it and saw Laura Buxton's name on it, he brought it to 10-year-old Laura Buxton. And I mean, the reality is this, it's still a remarkable balloon journey. I love this story. I love telling this story. I'll keep telling this story. But suddenly again, those little details change, make perhaps the fate of this story just a little less compelling. And so sure, the story's still amazing, but when you start dicing up the story, suddenly these two girls that seem destined to meet and be friends by fate or some mysterious force, well, there are a few holes in that idea. And you see, that's the power of storytelling, what we focus on and what we emphasize, what we want to hear and what we want to miss. And the reality is we are telling ourselves stories all the time, stories about ourselves, our identity, our decisions. But the devil's in the details. And maybe we need to start dicing up our own stories. It would be worth considering if some of us, if we diced up our stories a little bit, realize that, you know what, maybe I am playing the blame game here. And maybe I am buying into a narrative that won't allow me to extend my love and borders beyond where they are. And this is where things get interesting in the book of Acts. Peter crafts his story. He's exaggerating certain parts and omitting others, all in service of his agenda of closed borders and escaping guilt and shame. And so the warning of Peter's story here remains with us. What stories are we telling ourselves that keep us in the blame game mode and keep us from extending our boundaries? And maybe in thinking about our stories, we need to dice them up, push back on our stories, challenge them and ask them, are the stories we tell ourselves keeping us from loving beyond our borders? Are they keeping us from owning our responsibilities in life?
When ministry is conducted as though care for the congregants is the ultimate goal of the congregation without any missional imperative connected to it, obviously it invites passivity because we are simply on the receiving end of all the goodness of God. Whereas authentic gospel faith has to do with discipleship and missional mandates and extending oneself for the sake of the neighborhood. I'm talking about being engaged in the practice of an alternative economics that flies in the face of our unexamined commitment to capitalism. And when the church practices any kind of alternative economics, people who are uncritically committed to capitalism become at best nervous and more than that, very often resistant to that. But obviously any reading of the gospel has to do with an alternative economics which believes that the goods of the community have to be dispatched for the sake of all the neighbors. But it seems to me that the church historically among us has been over-invested in spirituality that is marked first of all by privatism, as though it has to do with just being cozy with Jesus, and on otherworldliness, as though the demands and realities of this world are basically irrelevant to what the gospel is about. And of course, that's a huge distortion of what has been entrusted to the church. And when we act as though the news of the gospel is to be getting ready for heaven, or when we act as though the gospel is about just my well-being for me, that obviously robs the gospel of all of its energy and all of its authority. The role of the church is to be imagining the political economy according to the witness of Jesus, and then as we do that imagining, to be engage actively, politically and socially in bringing that imagination to a historical reality. It is not about being liberal or progressive or socialist. Those are not biblical categories. It's about being neighborly. Christian materiality is the awareness that the stuff of our life that is right in front of us is the place where God meets us with mandates. It would be very useful to begin to have directors of materiality that helped people think Christianly about the material life that is right in front of them. The role of the church is to change the conversation. To change the conversation away from greed, fear, and violence. And if you take the opposite of greed, fear, and violence, it's generosity, trust, and peacemaking. That's the only conversation worth having.
I hope these short clips from Walter Brueggemann gave you a feel of what we're trying to open ourselves up to in this video series. Brueggemann is trying to help us see that to focus solely on our personal salvation, our personal work, our spirituality, which is not wrong and must be part of our journey, is only part of the picture of mature faith. If we focus only on our personal spiritual journey, then you can see how meeting the needs of all those around us simply can't happen. Brueggemann coins the word materiality as a counterpart of spirituality. They must go hand in hand. God loves the physical parts of our world. He created it as very good and then sent Jesus into the midst of it to show us how to live. This materiality talks about, or alternatively he calls neighborliness, is about the stuff of our lives that is right in front of us, and that is where God wants to meet us. This is a very practical discussion about living the Christian life in each minute of our lives. So, in a nutshell, that's the focus of the group. But what really excites me is when people get together in smaller groups, sharing, questioning, telling their stories, learning from each other. Seeing how others process good information isn't just informative, it's also fun. We were meant to learn from each other. We were meant to live in a relationship, and that is the strength of joining a small group. Each evening we'll watch together one video, usually about 10 minutes long, and then use it as a springboard for discussion generated by the group. We need to hear your questions, doubts, concerns, epiphanies, and disagreements. We grow best when we are together, honestly sharing all of this. Of course, we'll use Zoom, and we'll meet 7 or 8 weeks starting February 4th, 7:30 to 9. You can sign up from the Nexus Weekly, Facebook, website, or email me. I look forward to some great discussions and growth with you.
Friends, thank you for joining us this morning. I'm so glad and honored that you would give us your time and your presence. I appreciate it. Thanks for being with us. Remember again, Sunday, February 7th, 2 Sundays from now, we're going to have a family meeting directly after the service. There's a Zoom discussion meeting about the teaching today right after the service that you can click on in the link below. But for now, go in peace.
You and I in a little toy shop, buy a bag of balloons with the money we've got. Set them free at the break of dawn, till one by one